The Progressive Examiner talking today with Preston Picus, running in California's 12th congressional district. Preston, thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me, Victor.
First question I'd like to ask is what Bernie Sanders' political revolution means to you.
Oh, I find that Bernie Sanders and the progressive movement is something that's really important for American politics today. I emailed with Bernie's staff back in, I can't remember if it was 2004, 2008, really wanting him to run for Congress at that time. I've admired him as an independent, and as an independent myself, I've longed for a real independent candidate that's going to run. And I understand he's running as a Democrat, but he's been a long-time independent, and I believe in a lot of the same messages that he believes in. And, I believe that it's time for our country to move past the established elite that are dragging us into the drudges and killing this country, if you ask me. And so I'm ecstatic to see a guy like a political outsider like Bernie Sanders with a message of populist progressivism having the success that he's having.
So aside from his democratic socialist agenda, what specifically do you find appealing about the revolution itself?
Oh, well, up and down the line. But number one, foremost for me, is the repudiation of the use of money to corrupt our political system. And, in the same way that Bernie has refused super PACs, I also am refusing super PAC money. And in the same way that Bernie's allowing only, he's dependent on small donations, I myself, in my campaign, I've limited the amount of donations that I can accept from any individual from $5,400 to $540. And the truth is that as long as 0.01% of Americans fund more than 80% of our elections, you're going to see what you've seen for the last 30 years, which is a U.S. government that takes money from middle and lower income American households and shuffles it up to the wealthiest few, the tiniest minority. And as long as we have that, we have this great wealth inequality, and that great wealth inequality leads to massive fractures in our civilization, and it causes our country to feel great suffering and great anxiety.
Yeah, we call that plutocracy. Would you support, as a member of Congress, an amendment to the Constitution to overturn Citizens United and all related decisions going back in one direction to 1976 Buckley v. Vallejo, when the court decreed that money is equivalent to speech, and going back in another direction to the 19th century when the court decided that corporations should have the constitutional rights of individuals?
Oh, absolutely, 100%. I'll write that legislation myself on my first day in office. Look, the idea that money is speech is so counter to everything that our democracy is founded on that you can trace most of our problems to that simple concept. And if you take a look at what elections cost in the 1970s and what elections cost today, you can directly trace that. There's a great book called Winner Take All Politics by a couple of economists. And what they show is that as campaigns have become more expensive, and as money, and especially money of extremely wealthy individuals looking to bribe congressmen, has become more prevalent, our government has turned against the American people. And that once robust middle class that we experienced in the 1950s, and the job security and the financial security that our people felt, has been eroded over the last 40 years as campaign contributions have gone up and as the cost of running for Congress has increased, so that you can see a direct correlation between the economic reality of less income for our people, less participation in the growth, and more wealth inequality, to the amount of money that people are allowed to spend doing what I call bribing politicians. They call it campaign finance, but let's call it what it is. It's a bribe.
Let me change subjects to climate change. Would you support mandates on the manufacturers of all vehicles, recreational vehicles, cars, trucks, etc., who build the vehicles here in the United States or plan to sell the vehicles in the United States? Would you support mandates compelling them to propel their vehicles with some sustainable energy, hydrogen, battery, or whatever?
So without saying yes to a blanket statement, what I am interested in seeing is moves that are going to allow our technology to have a level playing field when it comes to the way our government sponsors it. So a mandate for something like the auto industry is an interesting one, but you have to weigh some international considerations, and you have to weigh the competition and the cost of doing business. What I would be more interested in is looking at how has the federal government allowed oil companies to have subsidies that create a situation in which oil maintains itself as the cheapest possible source of energy? This wasn't an accident. This is an active pursuit by very wealthy, powerful corporations that buy our congressmen, and they create laws that allow it so that the externalized cost of using oil, which the corporation should be accountable for, is then put on over to the American people. You take away those subsidies, and then suddenly alternative sources, renewable energy, becomes something that people are going to be able to get for a much cheaper price. But as long as those subsidies, as long as that money is being used to keep oil cheap, we're not going to see any change.
Would you support an increase of taxes on the top 1% of income earners, whether it's income or capital gains tax?
Certainly, I support the capital gains tax. And I support increase of tax on the wealthy, and I really support the increase of tax on corporations. But let's talk about that 1% idea for a moment. The reality is that growth in the United States hasn't been distributed evenly, and we like saying the 1% because it's a very handy tool. But the truth is that the 0.1%, the top wealthiest 0.1%, and really the top 0.01% are the ones that are gaining the most from this situation. So a progressive tax that brings more income to the United States government from people that are benefiting from these policies is absolutely necessary. But let's be clear, it's not simply the 1%. It's 0.01% of Americans. It's something like the Walton family that owns more money, owns more wealth than the bottom 40% of Americans. These are the individuals that are using their wealth to purchase congresspeople, to bribe politicians, and make sure that they get favorable legislation that leaves their fortunes intact.
Well, that begs the question then, what would be the top marginal tax rate that you would support as a member of Congress?
Well, that is a tricky question. Right now, to be in the top 0.01%, to be considered for that, you have to make an annual income of $10 million a year. And so I would favor taxing those sorts of things, absolutely. I think that a specific number on the top marginal tax rate would require some consideration and some conversation. One thing that you're leaving out, though, is these corporations, these for-profit institutions that have found ways through whatever government subsidy and through tax loopholes and offshore assets have found ways to pay almost nothing to the American public in terms of taxes. And so that's, I think, the best source of revenue that we can accomplish.
When was the last time you had a Democrat in the California 12th district, or 12th district?
Oh, well, so we do have a Democrat right now. Nancy Pelosi runs our district. And so what I'm running for is an anti-establishment sort of message. Nancy Pelosi's a nice woman. She's a good congresswoman. She has spent years in office. However, the establishment, the top of the party in the Democratic Party, they are not equipped to deal with the rising fascism that we see on the other side. This right-wing sort of terrorism that's coming after our country in the face of, in sort of the embodiment of a Donald Trump or something like that. The top establishment in both political parties are set on playing these sort of games with one another and winning political contests. But let's be clear, and I'm running in the June primary on June 7th in California's 12th in San Francisco. It's a Republican that typically takes second in our progressive town. And so what I'm running for is I'm running to beat the Republican candidate, and I'm running to be a progressive opposition to the current status quo in our political situation. If you ask people in San Francisco, they probably can't remember the last time they saw a Nancy Pelosi advertisement. And that's because she never has to campaign here. According to California's top 2 primary system, what you end up with is a situation in which everybody runs in June, the top 2 go through to November, and in the past, that's Nancy Pelosi and a Republican. San Francisco is never going to elect a Republican. And so in our district, Nancy Pelosi has never had to come back here and tell the people of San Francisco what she's going to do for our people, how she's going to represent our needs in Congress. And when I win in June, on June 7th, 2016, when I'm voted through that primary system, we will finally have a progressive candidate who is going to take this campaign and make at least the concessions that are necessary for a population to feel that they're being represented by their leadership, rather than seeing their leadership accepting all kinds of money, massive amounts of money from very wealthy individuals, and going off and doing whatever that is that they do in Congress without so much as campaigning, without so much as making a single promise to the people of San Francisco. So that's what my campaign will mean.
One last question. Is there anything Any issue that Senator Sanders supports that you disagree with?
The only thing that disappointed me was when he decided to run as a Democrat. But I understand why he did it. I firmly believe that the two-party system is destructive for our country. And when you've got 45% of Americans registered independent, and you've got something like 33% Democrat and 25% Republican. I know my numbers were off right there, but 40+% registered independent. What you see is dissatisfaction with the two-party system. And I struggled, and you can read through the material and the interviews that I gave in the beginning, but Bernie Sanders made it clear that he's an independent running for the Democratic nomination. And he didn't want to be perceived as doing a spoiler effect that third-party candidates are often accused of. But other than that, Bernie Sanders has my full support.
That's great. Best of luck to you, Preston. Appreciate your interview.
Thanks so much, Victor.